Okay, so get this right. We're diving into this podcast, Dangers in the Sky, and they're saying that, like, astrology can actually, like, predict global events. And I don't know about you, but that's
Yeah.
pretty wild.
It's a fascinating intersection, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they're looking at the astrological chart for October 4th, 2024, and they're saying there's a few things we need to keep an eye on.
Okay, so what's the big takeaway here?
Well, the big one is Pluto's going to be at -2 magnitude in Scorpio on October 4th, and that's
Okay, whoa, back up a second because I'm not an astrologer.
of course.
What does that even mean?
So in astrology, Pluto's kind of a big deal, right? It's this intense energy, all about transformation, like tearing things down to build them back up. And when it's in Scorpio, which is already a pretty intense sign, Scorpio, think like deep emotions, hidden power struggles, all that good stuff.
Okay.
It can get
So you're saying it's going to be a bumpy ride?
potentially, especially for anyone with strong Scorpio placements in their birth chart, particularly if they have Mars in Scorpio as well.
So if your birthday is in like what, late October, early November,
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
you might want to like batten down the hatches come October 4th.
It might not hurt, right? Because Scorpio rules those areas of life that are already kind of intense, like power dynamics, shared resources, even death and rebirth.
Wow.
So yeah, it's like this Pluto in Scorpio is highlighting those areas where big changes could be brewing.
And here's where I think things get really interesting, because they then connect this whole Pluto in Scorpio thing to potential global unrest.
Yeah, and this is where it goes from like personal transformation to like international relations.
Exactly, and they specifically point to NATO.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? Because NATO right now is...
Not a tinderbox.
Exactly. There's already so much tension within the alliance disagreements about strategy, different approaches to global threats. And when you think about what Pluto and Scorpio represents, those power struggles, those hidden agendas, it's like looking at a microcosm of those themes playing out on a global stage.
It's almost like the astrological weather is influencing the actual political climate.
Right, and that's what makes this kind of analysis so fascinating.
So we've got potential instability within NATO, but it doesn't stop there. They also point to Iran as a potential hotspot.
Yeah, they seem particularly concerned about Iran's astrological chart, particularly the placement of Mars in Pisces.
And what did that signify?
Well, they suggest that it could increase the risk of nuclear activity during this time.
Which is concerning to say the least.
Of course, especially given the existing tensions surrounding Iran's nuclear program.
Right. For those who maybe need a refresher, Iran's had this nuclear program for a while.
Yeah.
They claim it's for peaceful purposes.
Right, energy production, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But Western nations, especially the U.S., aren't so sure.
It's been a major point of contention on the world stage for years.
Absolutely. So, yeah, throwing this astrological prediction into the mix just adds another layer of complexity.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got NATO, we've got Iran. Any other regions we should be keeping an eye on?
They also mention Ukraine and Syria. Ukraine's already a volatile situation, and they specifically mentioned the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which has been...
It's right in the middle of the conflict zone.
Exactly. And with all the fighting going on around it, the potential for an accident or an attack is incredibly worrying.
Yeah, that's definitely a situation where things could escalate very quickly.
Absolutely. And then there's Syria. They mentioned a potential nuclear threat there as well, although they didn't go into too much detail.
Which is interesting because Syria has been the site of chemical weapons attacks in recent years.
Yeah.
So the idea of a nuclear threat is...
It's a very real and terrifying thought.
Okay, so we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff here, potential global conflict, nuclear threats. And according to this podcast, it all ties back to this idea of Pluto in Scorpio, these themes of power struggles and hidden agendas playing out on an international scale.
It's a lot to process.
It really is.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, what do we do with this information?
Well, I think the first step is awareness, right? Astrology isn't about predicting the future with absolute certainty, but it can offer a different perspective, a way of understanding the energies and potential challenges that might be coming our way.
So it's more about understanding potential risks and being prepared.
Exactly. And I think that's valuable in and of itself, right? If we can approach these situations with a greater understanding of the forces at play, we might be able to navigate them more effectively.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly.
Now, one thing that struck me was that while they highlighted these specific countries and events, they didn't really explain why those particular places were being affected by Pluto and Scorpio.
That's true. It's almost like they're saying these are the hot spots, but they don't really give us the astrological reasoning behind it.
Right. Like, do these countries share some other astrological connection that they didn't mention?
Or is it more about the existing geopolitical circumstances aligning with this particular astrological transit?
It definitely raises more questions than it answers.
And that's part of what makes astrology so interesting, right? It invites us to delve deeper, to keep exploring and questioning.
It certainly does. And it also makes you wonder if astrology can offer these kinds of insights into global events. How can we use that knowledge responsibly? How do we make sure it's not misused or misinterpreted?
That's a big question.
It is, and I don't think there's an easy answer. But it's something we should all be thinking about, especially as we navigate an increasingly complex and interconnected world.
I completely agree.